welcome to the Myrrh-Bearing Millennial podcast. I am your host, Jill, and I am so excited to be here. Guys, this is my first ever podcast. What? Oh my gosh, this has been a dream of mine for years. I can remember a few years ago, my husband, it was Christmas and he gave me this gift, and it was this podcast microphone actually. And with it was a little note that said like best podcast of the year or something like that. And it was super cute, and he had a lot of hope for me back then, and he still does today. But it took me a few years to get here. Truly just kind of looking back, I think it was that I couldn't figure out what exactly I wanted to talk about. But here we are. And now I'm just so excited to be here. I know exactly what it is that I want to talk about. I am here because I want to help women embrace and love motherhood and their marriage by sharing traditional marriage tips, learning how to embrace biblical femininity, and so much more. I 100% know and believe that women can absolutely find their purpose and their identity and love who they are as a mother and as a wife, and that happiness within their family is 100% possible, even when life throws the biggest curveballs. So if you're a mom who either is struggling at some point in your marriage, if you're struggling to embrace a traditional biblical type marriage, or maybe you're struggling to embrace motherhood, maybe you were thrown into being a stay-at-home mom when you weren't expecting to be that's my story. I definitely was never expecting to be a stay-at-home mom. But I'm really just here to help you through the mess and to let you know that you're not alone. And I am still actively living in the mess. So I am sharing my real life stories. I will share with you my story of my childhood that has led me to where I am, from a very toxic childhood to a traditional happy family and marriage right now, and just the journey that has brought me here. But I'm going to share with you all the mess. Like, my husband and I are not perfect whatsoever. We have so many lessons learned right now. We are on the biggest debt-free journey of our life. That is definitely going to be stuff that I talk about in this podcast. But just discussing like all the lessons we've been learning and more along the way. And my hope is that it resonates with you in some way, shape, or form, that you click with something, or that it connects with you, that it helps you in some way, or maybe you just find one of my ridiculous stories to be hilarious and it gives you a laugh for the day. That's my hope with this. We are here. This is real life motherhood, real life marriage, and we're just sharing it all. So I just want to welcome you. Before I dive into today's first episode, I do want to ask you at the end of this episode, if you love it, could you please leave a 5-star review? And if you love it, also tell people what you think about it. It will help the show get discovered, and I would be so thankful for that, as this podcast is just officially launching. Also, another thing I want to mention, I officially have a private community for Myrrh-Bearing Millennial moms. So if you are a mom and you are looking for a like-minded community of women sharing traditional conservative values where you can just be open and honest and connect, I've got the community for you. Go ahead and scroll down to the show notes. You're going to see the link there, and that's where you can join. We are in there every single day just talking about, oh my goodness, anything from the latest toddler tantrum to the outfit we're wearing for date night to how we're putting our makeup on and so forth. But we are there for each other, and you are more than welcome to come join the community. So let's go ahead and jump into today's episode. This episode is going to be maybe a little shorter. Actually, I don't know, because that's the other thing I want you guys to know. My episodes are never going to come scripted. I have bullet points of what I just know that I want to talk about, but they're never going to be scripted. So, I mean, they could be short episodes. They could be very long episodes. I like to talk, so we will see. But I know for a fact that I want to go over a few things with you guys so you know what to expect from this podcast moving forward. So hopefully it's something you connect with, or maybe you're like, I don't know if this is for me, but I hope it is, because I love you and I'm so glad that you are here. But I'm going to explain the reason behind my brand name. This is the first time ever I'm talking about this. I switched my brand name to Myrrh-Bearing Millennial later in 2022, and it was actually my husband's idea, and I'm going to talk about the brand name and the reasoning behind it and the reason I love it so much, but the reason it just connected whenever my husband came up with the idea. I'm going to talk a little bit about my story so you guys know more about me and where I come from. So listening to future episodes, you understand some of the advice or lessons learned, where those may have come from. And then my intention for this podcast and what you can expect from future episodes. So let's jump in. So first of all, Myrrh-Bearing Millennial. Might sound like an odd name, but let me go ahead and quickly explain this. So it's broken into two parts. There's myrrh-bearing and there's millennial. Myrrh-bearing actually comes from my patron saint. I am Orthodox Christian, and when you are chrismated into the Orthodox faith, you choose a patron saint. And I chose Saint Mary of Bethany. She is one of the myrrh-bearing women. If you have ever read the book of Luke, there is a little part in the book of Luke where Jesus goes to the home of Mary and Martha. And there's this really fun saying that I've seen on t-shirts and stuff that says, work like Martha, love like Mary. And it comes from this story in Luke. What happens is Jesus walks into the home and Mary just goes right to his feet and is ready to listen and everything. But Martha actually tries to throw Mary under the bus, and looks at Jesus and is like, hey, can you tell her to come help me? Like, I'm doing all this housework by myself. Tell her to come help me. And Jesus humbly reminds her, no, it's okay. Like, you need to come sit. Mary's doing the right thing by listening to me first. And so Martha has this amazing work ethic, but Mary had her priorities correct by putting Christ first. And so oftentimes I need reminded of that because I can feel very stressed out. I can feel like the weight of the world is just on my shoulders because of everything that needs done in my house. And so I needed reminded that no matter what happens in life, I always need to put Christ first. And so I loved Saint Mary, and I connected with her. So she is my patron saint, but she is also one of the myrrh-bearing women, who is the women who brought the oils to Jesus's tomb after he was crucified. So that's where myrrh-bearing comes from. And then the millennial is, I was born in 95. I'm a millennial, and so is my husband. I know that I'm technically a younger version of a millennial. I'm like right on the edge of the line between generations, I think, but I'm still a millennial. I still vibe with all the millennial stuff. My husband is very much a millennial. We're also, I guess, going to start like a contest on how many times I can say the word millennial in one podcast. But anyways, he was born in 91, so he's much more of an older millennial than I. But we were raised, this is going to come off harsh, and I don't mean it to. And I don't mean this against our parents. I mean this against the entire generation as a whole. But we were raised by a generation of parents who basically fell into complacency and trusted every single thing that the government had to say to them. That led to us being fed like Fred Flintstone vitamins that no one actually knew what was in those things. Studies weren't being done on Tylenol yet. Public school systems were nothing like what they are now. There was, they weren't anything like what they are now, but there was so much hidden that we didn't know about. I mean, conspiracy theories were still looked at as just conspiracy theories and not like, hey, is this actually the truth? Like, do we actually think our government is capable of this? Like, we were raised in this, and now millennials are trying to heal their inner child. They're trying to raise children completely different. Where a lot of us are going back to our traditional roots. A lot of us are wanting to embrace skills and mindsets that previous generations of ancestors had. A lot of us weren't taught things like how to be a homemaker, but not just how to be a homemaker, like how to make food completely from scratch and how to prepare a pantry and save in bulk and can and garden and all the things. And you see so many people going back to their roots because of inflation and because of corruption and because we can't trust anything, I feel like, anymore. And so a lot of millennials are turning back to this. And so that's kind of what a lot of my content is about, because I'm very much on that side that is against the woke agenda. I'm just going to put that out there, because if you're listening and you are pro woke agenda, I am not, so you're probably not going to vibe with this. But I very much have conservative values and traditional values. I am a Christian, and I am speaking against a lot of things that society has normalized within my content and in this podcast. So, and that's kind of how my husband and I are raising our kids and how we're learning how to handle and embrace and love and thrive in our marriage is going back to things our previous generations would have taught. So that's really the whole story, I guess, behind Myrrh-Bearing Millennial. Is it's a testimony to the generation that my husband and I grew up in, along with my patron saint. So my story. All right, I'm going to try and keep this as brief as possible. And every time I talk about my story to other people, my husband always starts it off with, oh, we're going to write the book. Someday, we're going to write the book. Maybe. First things first, I want this podcast to go out. But I do have quite an extensive story for my childhood. I was raised in a very unique childhood that most don't have to go through, and it was very traumatic, but it brought me to where I am today. So I am going to give you the cliff notes, basically, of my life, and we're going to try and keep this as simple as possible. Okay. So, here goes. So my mom served in the Navy, and while in the Navy, she was in a relationship with another woman, and they wanted to have a child. So she had a one-night stand with my biological father, and she never told him that I existed. And eventually, like right after I was born, she was living in Washington State at the time, and my grandpa drove all the way from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to Washington State to pick up me and my mom and bring us back to Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, my mom met my ex-stepdad, the man that she married for like 13 years. I have 3 siblings under him. Well, on my mom's side. And I love them to death. So if they're listening, I love you. But so I have 3 younger siblings under my mom's side with her ex-husband. And her ex-husband, however, was very, very abusive. He was a drunk. And I was not his child, and he made sure that I never forgot that, and he was very abusive to my mom and very controlling of my mom. We keep fast forwarding through this, get to about the time that I'm 14. We had moved back to North Carolina for a second time, and my mom met her now girlfriend that she's been with for, I think, 13 years now, and my mom has been happy ever since, but she left her ex-husband and went through the whole divorce, all this stuff. Then things started to get rocky between my mom and I as we started moving back to Pennsylvania. I was in sophomore year of high school at this point, and I wanted to seek out my biological father. And so by the time I had turned 18, so now I'm a senior in high school, I was ready to find my dad. I hired a private investigator to find him. It sounds way more extravagant than it was. I literally called up like the court system of the county that I lived in, and they gave me this amazing people finder, and she was super sweet, and she helped do it for a very inexpensive cost and stuff to find my dad. But anyways, so we find my dad. He learns about me, and him and I start having a really good relationship in the beginning. Lo and behold, throughout this whole time, I've learned that my entire childhood and up until that time, my mom had actually had a cocaine addiction. She had been addicted to cocaine long before I was ever even born, and still was addicted to cocaine throughout my entire childhood and up through that point, and had been addicted to cocaine until 3 years ago now. So that kind of gives a little bit of background into that as well. But my dad and I had a relationship for a while that was pretty good. And then in 2014, while I was in college, I was in a very severely abusive relationship, physically, emotionally, sexually, for 11 months. It was awful. And whenever I finally needed to get out because I feared for my life, I got out. But at the same time, when I got out of that relationship, I was trying to gain any control back over my life that I possibly could, especially my body. I definitely was pissed off at God. I had no relationship with God at that point. I wouldn't say no relationship. I was really mad at him. I rebelled against him. I knew he was there. I just had no interest in talking to him. And so I was very rebellious. And I call this, it was 1 month. It was one very, very short but long month that is a stain in my past. as I call it, my hoe face. And it's exactly what it was. I am very open about it. I'm not proud of it, but it happened. And in that 1 month, God basically looked at my husband and was like, hey, swipe right on her on Tinder because you need to go save her. That's exactly what happened. I literally met my husband a month after I got out of that abusive relationship. And I fell in love with him so quickly. And I kind of joke to this day that God was like, hey, go take this hoe and turn her into a homemaker. Just kidding. I know he didn't actually say that. And to anyone listening, I'm sorry for swearing, but it's my little joke and that's what I call it. But that's what happened. And my husband and I met and I just fell in love with him. He became my best friend and he's the first person ever to show me what actual love looks like and should feel like. And so, things got rocky between my dad and I, and 2 years ago, my dad, through a conversation, had told me that had my mom told him about me whenever she was pregnant with me, he wouldn't have wanted to know me in the first place because I would have ruined his life. So, needless to say, my father and I no longer have a relationship. End of the story with that one. My mom and I actually did have a PFA against her for 3 years around the time that my grandmother had passed away. So my grandmother raised me for a good bit of my life, and she was one of my favorite people in the whole wide world. And she died very, very suddenly from cancer. And at that time, my mom was so heavily into cocaine whenever my grandmother passed. And so a lot happened, and a court had granted me a 3-year protection from abuse order against my mom. So we didn't speak for 3 years. And just in the middle of 2022, my mom and I finally reunited. We started going to therapy. She's been clean for 3 years. She's doing wonderful and amazing. This is truly the best I've ever seen her. She met my children for the first time, and we have an amazing relationship now. So that is a very brief insight into the story of my life. There was a lot of abuse, I was raised by alcoholics and drug addicts, moved a ton in my life. So nothing was ever stable. I was pretty much raised by my mom and she was a single waitress. So we didn't have money. It was poor growing up. And just kind of went through the thick of it for a very, very long time until I met my husband. And truly God has just worked so many miracles since then. And yeah. So that's a little bit of my story that has led me to where I am now, because through that toxic childhood, I've learned how amazing a traditional marriage truly can be when it's God-centered. My husband and I have gone through a ton of work together. I mean, he's had to help me as I was healing from PTSD and so much more. He's truly the most loving and supportive person I've ever met in my entire life, and I'm just so thankful for him. But now we have a traditional marriage. We have 2 amazing children. So Gemma and Henry. Gemma is 3, and Henry will be a year old here in just a month. Oh my gosh, I can't believe that. My husband and I have been married now for almost 5 years. We've been together for a total of 7 years. And so things I'm very open about. I am a submissive wife, and I know that might confuse some people, that might rub people the wrong way. I will explain this so much more in depth in further episodes, but it is definitely something I talk about because I 100% believe biblical submission could save so many marriages if it was done correctly. There would be way fewer divorce rates and so forth if this was embraced correctly. So that's definitely something that I talk about in my story. I'm also very much pro-life, and I have an incredible guest speaker that'll be coming on in a few weeks who I had this incredible conversation with about the pro-life movement and reproductive technology and so forth. So my story has brought me to this point now where I really wanted to heal from a lot of that toxic childhood and have a happy family. Like I said, we're not perfect. We are still making a ton of mistakes. We made so many mistakes just last year alone. We are fixing it this year. Like I said, right now we are on a get out of debt hella fast kind of journey right now. On top of that, just really learning how to grow my business and while being a stay-at-home mom and what that balance looks like. And what brought me into being able to talk with other stay-at-home moms is I didn't want to be a stay-at-home mom. I wanted to be a mom. I knew that. But I have a bachelor's degree in criminology, and it was actually my career plan to be a victims advocate. And I was one for 2 years. I specialized in working with victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking. And I loved it. However, a car accident that led to a traumatic brain injury took me out of the field. And we really had to go through, I was in a year and a half of physical therapy and vestibular therapy and cognitive therapy to basically retrain my brain on how to do a lot of stuff. And so through that, within that year and a half, we also happened to get pregnant. And I was home and I didn't want to be. So I was like, okay. So Gemma was born in October of 2019. And I was still determined to work outside the home. Like I wanted her with me, but I didn't want to be home. I didn't want to be a stay-at-home mom. I really wanted to own a store at that time in my life. So we opened a store, but our grand opening day was ended up being the day the world shut down with COVID. So we had to postpone our grand opening. I think we postponed it like a month and a half. And then we opened, but opening a business and then running a business through the pandemic, not easy. So the store didn't last longer than a year. I truly believe now, I'm so thankful for the store because it did help bring me through postpartum depression. So I wasn't home that entire time. And I was forced to be around people, even though we definitely weren't supposed to be, but it worked out. But that was a fun little stint. But basically in that, God showed me, no, you're going to be home. I can still absolutely make an income, and I do while being home. But my priority is to be home with my children. And since embracing that, I have fallen in love with every single part of it. So much so that I nanny now. I've taken on extra children because I just love being home with them and the opportunity to just spend this time with them. So that leads me into my intention for the podcast. My intention is that I'm able to help and connect with women who are going through so many different stages in life, whether it's healing their inner child or learning how to be a submissive wife or wanting to fix a marriage or learning how to be a stay-at-home mom or find their identity or their purpose in motherhood, whatever it is. I hope that I can connect with you, and I hope that something resonates with you, and I hope that God just helps use me in a way that can help you. If not, like I said, I hope I can provide some sort of comedy because I'm very awkward and I mix up metaphors all the time and mess up sayings, so guaranteed I'm going to mess something up. Like I said, these podcasts are not scripted. I'm just speaking off the cuff. I think that saying was right. But I'm a very awkward person as it is. So hopefully I can provide some comedic relief along the way as well. But what you can expect from future episodes is really life lessons that I've learned along the way, tips on how to embrace traditional marriage and how to love being a mom and embracing motherhood. And I also have some awesome, and I mean awesome guests lined up for even deeper topics, such as the Orthodox faith and the pro-life movement and homesteading and home birthing and doula and just you name it. We've got so many episodes lined up for you. I'm so excited. I can't wait. Oh my gosh. Okay. So that's really it for today. That's kind of the introduction into the episode. I hope this was okay. First time doing this. I'm going to keep improving. Absolutely feel free. DM me. I would love some positive criticism to help me navigate and better improve these episodes as we go along throughout the first season of the Myrrh-Bearing Millennial podcast. As a reminder, please, if you loved this, leave a 5-star review and share it with your friends. So that way it can be discovered by more. And remember, in my show notes, if you want to join a community of like-minded women, go ahead and click that link and join that community. We would love to have you there. So thank you so much for joining today. New episodes are being released every single Wednesday, and I can't wait to see you guys next week.